Namaste and welcome back.
This is chapter 5 of the Bhagavad Gita series. The links to the other chapters have been provided in the description box. In this video, we are going to give you a verse-by-verse explanation of chapter 5, which is Karma Sannyas Yoga. So watch the video till the end, hit the like button if you like the video, consider subscribing to OM Dharma YouTube channel for receiving regular updates, and share the video with your loved ones. So let's get started. In verse number 5.1, Arjun asks Lord Krishna, "First you speak about yoga, then you praise renunciation of action. O Krishna, of the two, tell me which one most assuredly is beneficial for me." While concluding the previous chapter, Lord Krishna spoke about the renunciation of action through yoga in the second last slok. He was quite clear that renunciation of actions does not mean running away from actions. It means renouncing the agency or the sense of doership behind the action. Now Arjun still retained a desire to run away from the war against his relatives. So even though Lord Krishna was quite clear that one cannot run away from action, Arjun was still looking for a way to quit fighting the war. So he interpreted the word renunciation to mean what most people think renunciation means, and that is going away to a remote ashram, becoming a monk, and then contemplating upon the eternal essence, casting aside any other worldly responsibilities. With this interpretation in mind, he wanted to know whether renunciation of action was better than karma yoga. If that were the case, he could run away from the war to a place of contemplation and gain self-realization following that path. He wanted an unambiguous answer from Lord Krishna because he already had asked the question at the beginning of the third chapter. To this, Lord Krishna replies in 5.2 and he says, "Both renunciation of action and the yoga of action confer ultimate bliss. But between the two, the yoga of action is superior to renunciation of action." By making this statement, Lord Krishna reiterates the teaching imparted to Arjun in the beginning of the third chapter, when Arjun had asked a similar question. Lord Krishna throughout the Gita has stressed that we can attain self-realization while staying in the world and performing our duties. Like Arjun, we often get tempted to renounce the world, especially when we are going through a tough time in our life. But as we have seen earlier, if we retreat from the world but have not fully addressed our ego and our selfish desires, we still be thinking about the material world in the confines of the cave or the ashram we have retreated into. And therefore, having taken into account Arjun's mental makeup, knowing fully well that like us, even Arjun still had a lot of desires, Lord Krishna deemed that Karma Yoga was the right path for Arjun and that he was not well suited to becoming a monk. In 5.3 he further says, "He who does not hate anything, nor expects anything, know him to be an eternal renouncer. For one who is free from duality, O mighty armed, he happily casts off bondage." During the time of the Mahabharat war, and even now, there existed a fixed ideal of what it means to become a renouncer, which was that one runs away from the world to some remote place. Lord Krishna needed to change that ideal completely, so he defines what it means to be a renouncer or a sannyasi in this shlok. A renouncer is one who completely gives up his ego, not external objects and situations. In that regard, Lord Krishna says that if we have three qualities, and that is freedom from hatred, expectation and duality, that person is a true renouncer. Firstly, if something is an obstacle to happiness or someone is giving us sorrow, we generate hatred for that person or object. Secondly, if we always keep thinking that we will become happy in the future, we generate expectations, taking consciousness away from the present and into the future. And finally, if we only get attracted to a certain aspects of our existence, the other aspects will torture us and bind us. This is what is meant by duality. So therefore, one who has become free from these three qualities has truly renounced the material world even if he continues to perform his duties. So 5.4 translates to, only the naive say that the yoga of knowledge and the yoga of actions are different. Wise people do not. One who is perfectly established in one obtains the result of both. Lord Krishna reiterates his message from the 3rd chapter in this slok. He says that the path to attain self-realization is one, but it has 2 stages. In the first stage, the seeker performs actions according to his swadharma, but focuses on checking and sublimating the ego while performing his action. This stage is called karma yoga. When the seeker has exhausted the majority of his desires, he becomes ready for the next stage. In the next stage, the seeker minimizes actions other than those performed for gaining knowledge through the guidance of a teacher. The second stage is possible only after the ego has been sublimated through renunciation. This stage is called karma sannyas. Lord Krishna then goes on to say that only people who are ignorant of the connection between these 2 stages say that karma sannyas and karma yoga are different paths. They also think that it is possible to bypass stage 1 and go straight to stage 2. This ability to bypass stage 1 is only possible for a handful of advanced seekers in this world, seekers who have already sublimated their desires. And therefore, having known this, he urges us to become wise people and not to think of the path of self-realization as 2 different paths. If we become established in one stage, we will automatically get the result of self-realization that one gets from pursuing the other stage. In other words, we should follow the path that we are qualified for and follow it properly. Further in 5.5, Lord Krishna says, one who obtains the state of bliss through knowledge also reaches the same stage through yoga. He who sees knowledge and yoga as one, that person sees it correctly. In this shlok, the words yoga and knowledge need further elaboration to get an underlying meaning. In the context of this chapter, yoga means the yoga of action, which is karma yoga, and knowledge means yoga of knowledge through renunciation, which is karma sannyas yoga. So the shlok translates to, one who obtains the state of bliss through the yoga of knowledge also reaches that same state through the yoga of action. In the wise person's view, both of these are one. It is like 2 passengers boarding a train from different stations, but both reach the same destination. Let us dig deeper to understand what is common between renunciation and action. Imagine that 2 people are striving for self-realization. One person performs karma yoga, but does not think carefully about how he performs his action. Without proper thought and discrimination, his actions become selfish and his vasanas increase. Ultimately, he does not attain his goal. The other person decides that he prefers renunciation. He goes to an ashram to lead the life of a monk, but even though he has renounced the material world, he keeps thinking about his life in the material world. He too does not attain his goal because his desires prevent him from properly absorbing his teacher's teachings. In both the cases, renunciation and action do not work because they are missing the key ingredient, and that is knowledge. Unless one uses vivek while performing action or maintains the knowledge that I am not the doer prior to renunciation, the goal is not attained by either person. And therefore, Lord Krishna urges wise people to keep discrimination in the picture while considering either stage of the path. Further in 5.6 he says, for renunciation, O mighty armed, is difficult to attain without yoga. The contemplative person established in yoga swiftly attains the eternal essence. Lord Krishna says, bypassing the first stage of karma yoga will make attainment of the eternal essence difficult for a seeker that has not fully exhausted his desires. The best option is to start with karma yoga because, like the yoga of knowledge, it too will yield the same result of self-realization. To understand this, let us examine a different question. Why do you think are there only a few PhDs in the world? It takes a certain kind of a person to obtain a PhD. One has to be ready to spend most of their life in a lab. One has to do what it takes to get their experiment right. They have to survive on their petty stipend for several years, and all this is for the sole objective of discovering something that benefits the mankind. So similarly, not many people can minimize their worldly activities up to an extent that they would retire to an ashram to gain knowledge from a teacher. For most of us, the pull of our desires is so strong that we will continue to strive in this world. And therefore, liberation has to come from our actions, not through renunciation. He also mentions Karma Yoga advocates thoughtful action, where one thinks before one acts. The biggest obstacle in moving towards spiritual life is our ego. It creates selfish desires that move us towards the material world. So when we perform actions thoughtfully, in other words, when we ensure that our actions are performed without attachment towards the result, our selfish desires gradually gets eliminated. In 5.7 he says, one who is established in yoga, who has conquered the mind, body and senses, one who sees his own self in all beings, even while acting, is not tainted. To understand this slok better, let's imagine that a new factory has opened up in a small town and the public has been invited to take tours of the factory. One such tour has a businessman, an environmentalist, an engineer and a musician as visitors. While walking through the factory, the businessman's first thought is about the amount of profit that the factory is making. The environmentalist thinks about the pollution caused by the factory. The engineer marvels at the brand new machines, and the musician loves the rhythm generated by the clanking machines. One's vision gives an indication of how one's mind works. Similarly, in the shlok, Lord Krishna illustrates the vision of one who is acting with the spirit of Karma Yoga. Even while acting, that person does not generate any further desires because he has the same vision that a renouncer has. He sees the eternal essence everywhere, in himself as well as in everyone else. And like the example we saw earlier, his vision indicates that his entire personality, including his mind and intellect, have gained the knowledge of eternal essence. Lord Krishna also reminds us that such knowledge is not possible without first bringing the body, mind and senses under control. Actions performed by such an individual do not taint him. In verses 8 and 9 he says, "Never do I perform any action in this manner," asserts the one established in yoga, who has realized the eternal essence. Seeing, hearing, touching, smelling, eating, moving, dreaming and breathing, speaking, discarding, grasping, opening and closing of the eyelids. All this is the senses interacting with the sense objects. This is his understanding. We learned that one who has realized the eternal essence understands that he is not the enjoyer or doer. So to make this as explicit as possible, Lord Krishna provided a detailed illustration of that teaching in his shlok. Here he gives a comprehensive list of all activities performed by the body, mind and intellect. By providing this illustration, he demonstrates that one who has realized the eternal essence knows, in fact asserts, that he is not doing anything, and all these activities are happening automatically through the body, mind, and the intellect. The 10th verse says, "Having offered all actions to the eternal essence and having cast off attachments, he who performs actions does not get tainted by sins, just like water does not taint a lotus leaf." Here Lord Krishna says that the person who has not realized the self, like most of us, he offers all actions in a spirit of devotion to Ishwar. He reiterates that if one has selfish desires, then Karma Yoga is the ideal path for him to follow. The Karma Yogi works for a higher ideal such as Ishwar, but one who does not follow Karma Yoga works for the ego. Krishna brings Arjun back to Karma Yoga with this shlok. Arjun harbors desires, therefore Krishna does not want him to jump straight into the yoga of renunciation, which is a more advanced level. A Karma Yogi strives to transcend all the levels of attachment by offering results, actions, doership and non-doership to Ishwar. When he acts in the material world with such a vision, he does not accumulate any further desires, just like a lotus leaf does not get wet, even though growing within the water. In 5.11, Lord continues to say, solely with body, mind, intellect and senses does the seeker perform actions, casting off all attachment for the purification of the self. Lord Krishna in this shlok says that the Karma Yogi continuously keeps the thought that the body, mind, intellect and senses are all the property of Ishwar, given by Ishwar. Therefore, all the work done is for the benefit of Ishwar and not for the ego. The Gita teaches that the body, mind, intellect and senses are not really ours. But due to our conditioning, we begin to think that they are ours. We then begin to do things for their benefit. For example, the tongue likes sweet food, so we undertake actions to satisfy it by eating things that may not be healthy from a long-term perspective. When actions are done for the satisfaction of body, mind or intellect or senses, the sense of myness develops and the ego gets strengthened. We then begin to serve the ego, whereas a karma yogi treats his body, mind, intellect and senses as instrument of Ishwar. When that attitude comes, all actions and their results get offered to Ishwar. In this manner, the seeker detaches himself from the body, mind, intellect and senses from the ego and attaches them to Ishwar. This is what is meant by casting off all attachment. Now let's examine the second part of the shlok where Lord Krishna talks about the purification of self. What happens when Karma Yogi continues to dedicate actions to Ishwar? His mind gets cleared of all selfish desires and his ego begins to lose its power. And the end result is that the mind is purified of all vasanas, which is what is meant by self in the shlok. Purification of mind brings the Karma Yogi closer to self-realization. Next in 5.12 he continues to say, one who is established in yoga, who has given up the result of action, attains everlasting peace. One who is not established in yoga, who has attachment to results due to desire, gets bound. Lord Krishna differentiates between a karma yogi and a materialistic person in the shlok. While both perform the very same action and could very well get the same result, their attitude towards the work is different. One who follows karma yoga maintains the attitude that I am not attached to the results, whereas the materialistic person does not maintain this attitude. The ignorant person does actions for the sake of the result. He does not find joy in the work itself. If the result is favorable, he gets extremely elated, but his happiness, and in some instances peace of mind, is temporary. The minute the results of his action turns unfavorable, he gets extremely dejected and disappointed. But the karma yogi does not wait for the result of the action to obtain joy. He finds joy in the work itself. The peace that he attains is driven from within rather than from outside. It is this mental attitude that differentiates the karma yogi from the materialistic person. The easiest way to gauge our progress towards karma yoga is to constantly monitor our state of mind. If we get agitated for a long period of time when we receive the result of our action, it is an indication that we have generated an attachment to the result, which in turn indicates that the ego is strong. In 5.13, Lord Krishna says, having mindfully renounced all actions, the conqueror remains established in bliss. The embodied one in the city with 9 gates neither acts nor causes to act. Having spoken about the Karma Yogi's vision, Lord Krishna now provides an illustration of the enlightened seeker's vision. He says that the one who identifies him with the eternal essence knows that he is only a dweller in the body, just like the resident of a city knows that he is a dweller who is totally distinct from the city. Imagine that you move into a new city for a job. As a part of the move, you begin to utilize the city's services such as water or electricity or garbage collection, telephone, cable, etc. But while you utilize these services, you know that you are a resident of the city. You don't begin to think that you are directly responsible for running the city. For instance, when you call someone to pick up the garbage, it is the part of a city's service. You are in no way running the services. Similarly, the enlightened seeker knows that he is the eternal essence, which is a dweller in the body and separate from the body. The body is pictorically depicted as a city with 9 gates, each gate being an orifice, for example, like the ears or nostrils or eyes and so on. So when the seeker uses his hands, for example, he knows that the body, mind, and intellect are operating independently. The enlightened seeker is in actuality doing nothing at all. Just like the resident knows that the city's services operated by themselves, and he is just a witness, similarly the enlightened person knows that the self is just a resident in the body, totally separate from the body. Another indication of the seeker's state is that he has complete control on his senses and that he has mentally renounced the notion of doership. He knows that it is the body, mind, and intellect that is performing action. This is indicated in the first part of the shlok. The end result is that the seeker lives in complete bliss. In 5.14 he says, neither agency nor actions in this world are created by the eternal essence, and neither does it connect actions to results, for nature organizes all this. In this shlok, he takes us one step further by saying that the eternal essence is beyond the realm of action. And since action implies doership, results, and their enjoyership, action and everything that comes with it is in the realm of Prakriti or nature. The eternal essence is a separate and distinct from action. Any self-contained system has inherent rules which govern its operations. Similarly, one who sees the world from an absolute standpoint of eternal essence knows that in reality there is no action. Action only exists from the standpoint of nature or Prakriti. And if action only exists in nature, so does the doership or enjoyership and connection of actions to their result. It is a self-governing automatic system. In 5.15, he says, neither does the eternal essence accept anyone's sin, nor anyone's merits. Ignorance veils knowledge. That is how creatures are deluded. Here he takes us another step further in explaining the distinctness of eternal essence from action. He says that even sin and merit also have nothing to do with the eternal essence. He says that the notion that action, result, doership, enjoyership, sin, merit, etc. belong to the eternal essence is ignorance. This ignorance is caused due to our strong identification with the body, mind, and intellect. Now, in some places in the Bhagavad Gita, Lord Krishna asks us to offer merit and sin to God. But here it is said that eternal essence does not take sin or merit. So how do we reconcile this seeming contradiction? What we need to understand here is that the person who thinks he is associated with action, sin, and merits is at one level, and the person who has identified himself with eternal essence is at another level. Another way to look at it is to believe that sin and merit are duality. They are two sides of the same coin, as it were, just like black and white, or heat and cold, or day and night. When you rise above it, duality has no bearing. Day and night do not mean anything when one is in the outer space. When one leaves the earth and rises above it. Here's another noteworthy point. Lord Krishna has used an interesting word to refer to ignorant people in this shlok. He calls them creatures. It is a subtle hint that as long as we operate with body identification, we are similar to animals who also operate only at that level. In 16, he says, but for those in whom this ignorance of the self is destroyed by divine knowledge, that knowledge reveals the supreme entity, just as the sun illuminates everything in daytime. Here, Lord Krishna compares the dispelling of ignorance to the dispelling of darkness by the sun. The light of the sun does not create anything new. It just shows us what was already there, but was hidden by darkness. Similarly, the knowledge of eternal essence does not create anything new in us. It just reveals our true nature. The central theme of the Gita is the removal of delusion. The root cause of delusion is ignorance, which is nothing but our identification to the body, or mind and intellect. All our efforts should be towards uprooting this ignorance through the correct knowledge. However, our lives are spent in trying to solve problems that are at worldly level. There is always one aspect of our lives that is incomplete or imperfect. For some of us, it could be our job. For others, it could be our family or friends. For some others, it could be our health. Given these various imperfections, we never try to better our situation by changing our job, friends, or family. This results in a roller coaster ride of joys and sorrows. But if we take a truly objective look at this situation, it turns out that we are looking for perfection in the material world, which is always imperfect. Lord Krishna says here that the only way to get to the root of this problem is to remove our ignorance towards the eternal essence. In the next shloka he continues and he says, his intellect lies in that, his mind lies in that, his conviction lies in that, his goal lies in that. He reaches that state from which there is no return due to his sins removed by knowledge. In this shlok, Lord Krishna illustrates the personality of the seeker whose aspiration for the eternal essence is so intense that his entire personality resonates with that thirst for the eternal essence. His mind, intellect, conviction, goal, all these are aligned with the eternal essence. It is important that both the mind and intellect need to be convinced that the only goal worth pursuing is the eternal essence, even if the eternal essence has not yet been realized. It is like the scientists who planned the mission to the moon, yet none of them had ever been to the moon. The mind needs to have love for the moon, and the intellect needs to enjoy the intellectual challenge that the task entails. If only the mind is convinced, it could lead to superstition. If only the intellect is convinced, it could lead to nihilism. Only when mind and intellect are convinced is when the whole personality is oriented towards the eternal essence. Once he gains the knowledge of the eternal essence, he transcends all duality, including the notion of sins and demerits. Poetically, Lord Krishna puts it as the state from where there is no return, because all notions of duality have completely disappeared. In 5.18 he says, a Brahman endowed with knowledge and sense control, a cow, an elephant, a dog, even a dog eater. The wise person perceives all these as one. Lord Krishna further elaborates on the vision of a realized seeker in this shlok. Unlike most of us who tend to focus on the differences, the realized seeker focuses on the eternal essence, which is common in every plant, animal, human, or even a situation or an inanimate object. For instance, a child wants a cookie shaped like a lion, whereas the adult won't really care about the cookie's shape because his focus is on the dough that is common with each cookie. So a spectrum of entities has been laid out before us, from the Brahman that has a high level of sattva to a cow that has a lesser sattvic content, all the way to a dog eater with almost non-existent level of sattva. Lord Krishna says that the wise person sees the eternal essence in all of them. Now, just because the wise person views everyone with a similar vision does not mean that he treats them similarly or deals with them similarly. He will deal with a dog differently than he would treat a Brahmin. How is it possible? It is just like we see our body as one, but we treat our eyes differently than we would treat the soles of our feet. In the 19th shlok he says, those whose minds are established in equality of vision conquer the cycle of birth and death in this very life. They possess the flawless qualities of God and are therefore seated in the absolute truth. In the last shlok, Lord Krishna spoke about the wise person who sees the same eternal essence in everyone. Here he goes deeper into this point and addresses some questions that could come up when trying to understand that shlok. Consider a hardened criminal. Most of us would classify his behavior as defective. Now, given the context of the previous shlok, where the wise person perceives a criminal and a saint with the same vision, how does it actually happen? To address this point, Lord Krishna mentions in the shlok that the personality of the criminal has the defect, not the eternal essence. The eternal essence is inherently defect-free. Another question that may arise is, when and where does one attain the eternal essence? How much time will it take and how far away it is? The answer is that notions such as near or far, slow or fast are dualities. Any such duality belongs to nature, not to the eternal essence. Therefore, one whose intellect has transcended duality immediately attains the eternal essence. Finally, Lord Krishna explains that attaining the eternal essence is possible here and now. We do not have to wait for another birth. Following the technique of Karma Yoga, we have to purify our mind and make it steady and harmonious so that it can meditate on the eternal essence. In Shlok number 20, he says, having obtained a desirable situation, he does not get elated, nor does he get perturbed if it is undesirable. The person of steady intellect is never deluded. The knower of the eternal essence is established in the eternal essence. Here Lord Krishna emphasizes the realized seeker's outlook towards situations in the material world. Like any other person, the realized seeker encounters pleasant and unpleasant situations. He cannot avoid them. But the difference is that these situations do not destabilize the realized seeker. In other words, they do not cause elation or depression. Usually when something undesirable happens to someone that we do not know, it does not affect us. But if it happens to us, we fall sick. It affects us deeply. But the wise person has transcended the ego. He recognizes that every situation is part of nature. In nature, elements are interacting with the elements in multiple configurations. Once he has this vision, happenings of the world do not impact him. It is important to note that situations, both good and bad, have their own place in our lives. Unpleasant experiences are useful from a relative world perspective because they usually have a lesson embedded within them. With each unpleasant situation, the emotion of sadness will arise. But in a realized seeker, there will be a space between the emotion and the self. For instance, if we are on a boat, the ups and downs of the sea will impact us. But if we are standing on a rock on the shore, we will not be affected. Realized seekers remain unperturbed because their understanding of the eternal essence has become stable and firm. They have become sthita prajna. They are free from the delusion of doership and enjoyership. Initially, when this knowledge is first gained, it stays on the surface. We experience the eternal essence sporadically, for a brief instance, then immediately go back into identification with the body, mind, or intellect. So therefore, the one who constantly maintains the identification of the eternal essence becomes one with the eternal essence. He remains a pure witness of the ups and downs of the material world. In Shlok number 21, he says, one who is not attached to external sense contacts finds inner bliss. Such a person, established in contemplation of the eternal essence, experiences inexhaustible joy. So far, Lord Krishna explained the vision of a realized seeker. From this shlok onwards, he starts turning towards the topic of meditation. Turning oneself inwards away from the sense object of the world is the first step towards meditation. Here, he also explains the reason for turning inward. Our entire life is geared towards the pursuit of happiness. However, if we introspect, we realize that the happiness we get from these sense objects, such as tasty food or a visually appealing movie, is instantaneous but short-lived. Sense objects are finite, and so is the happiness that they can provide. Moreover, if we are not careful, we get attached to whatever gives us instant happiness so that we can repeat the experience. This also leads us to sorrow, which comes from constant commentary and judgment from intellect when we lose access to sense objects. But Lord Krishna gives us a better alternative. When we slowly move away from sense objects and turn inward to contemplate on the eternal essence, we can tap into a source of happiness that is much greater than any happiness produced by sense objects. Moreover, this happiness is never ending. It is inexhaustible because it is derived out of the eternal essence, which is infinite. In slok number 22, he says, "For the pleasures born out of sense contact are only wombs of sorrow. They have a beginning and ending. O son of Kunti, the wise person does not indulge in them." Here, Lord Krishna provides another compelling reason to turn away from sense pleasures. He says in no uncertain terms that pleasures born out of sense contact are not really pleasures at all. They are not just sorrow disguised as pleasure, they are wombs of sorrow, which means that a single experience of sense contact sows the seeds for multiple sorrows. For many of us, the period of transition between academic life and work life is when a lot of these seeds are sown. As we start earning money, we automatically seem to find outlets to spend this money. Some develop an attachment to a high-end coffee. Some develop an attachment to going to clubs. Some develop a taste for vehicles and so on. If we introspect, we realize that the pleasure obtained by any of these objects is not just temporary but results in a chain of sorrows later on. Take high-end coffee for instance. The first few times it is quite pleasurable, but later you cannot do without it. But then where does the pleasure arise in the first place? The mind is restless without constant sense contact. Depending upon the strength of the vasanas that we have cultivated, it experiences a vacuum and rushes out into the material world towards an object in order to fill that vacuum. At the same time, the eternal essence present within us, having identified with the mind, also rushes out into the world. When the sense contact happens, the mind temporarily ceases to move outside and comes into contact with the eternal essence. This results in joy. So here is where the mix-up happens. The joy was already inside us. The mind causes us to believe that it is outside us. Furthermore, this joy is short-lived because the mind will again go out into the material world. Then the cycle of sorrow, which is vacuum, and joy, which is sense contact, will repeat itself. And this is called sansar. Therefore, Sri Krishna urges us to become wise people and realize that sense contact is not the true source of joy. In the next shloka he says, "He who even before this body departs is capable of withstanding the impulse born out of desire and anger, that person is a yogi, that person is blissful." Here he points out exactly why does the mind rush out into the material world. He says that in a person who is working towards purifying his mind, there still exist two major obstacles to realization, which is desire and anger. Both of these generate impulses that cause the mind to go out in the material world. Even though the seeker cannot get rid of the desire and anger, but he can check the impulses caused by them, and that person will attain happiness from within rather than from outside. Let's examine what exactly is desire and anger in the framework of Gita. Whenever one encounters sense pleasures or recalls a memory of a sense pleasure, the need to re-experience that sense pleasure is called desire. Conversely, when one encounters a sorrowful circumstance or recalls a sorrowful memory, the repulsion generated is called anger. Both these emotions generate impulses to chase after or run away from an object, or a person, or a circumstance. For the mind to realize the eternal essence, it needs to be balanced, but these impulses take the mind outwards and destabilize it. Now there is a possibility of a dilemmatic situation here. There will be an impulse within us to seek joy. Unless we redirect it inward, it will always rush outwards. But if we redirect it inward and it does not find joy, it will again go outward. And therefore, turning this impulse inward has to be done intelligently. If all we do is cut ourselves from the objects that give us pleasures, it will not work. Instead, we must work diligently towards purification of our mind and performance of swadhyay, whether it is reading scriptures or doing puja and so on. As our mind finds exponentially more joy in swadhyay, it will automatically turn inwards and drop its fascination with external objects. In 5.24, Lord continues to say, "One who finds bliss in the self, who reveals in his self, whose knowledge is the self, he is a yogi and attains liberation through identification with the eternal essence." Here Lord Krishna further explains the nature of one who is liberated by establishing himself in the eternal essence. Such a liberated seeker is called a rishi. It means one who knows, one who has knowledge of the eternal essence. Typically, we think of a rishi as someone who has a beard and wears a robe. It is not so. A rishi uses knowledge and discrimination constantly and knows the difference between the real and the unreal. Such a rishi has 4 attributes. According to the shlok, he is free of all defects, he is free from all doubts, he has complete self-control, and he is engaged in the welfare of all beings. The rishi is the one who has freed himself of all mental impurities. The core or the key mental impurity is ignorance, which manifests in the form of affinity for worldly pleasures. Also, he is free from all doubts regarding who he really is. Until the mind has doubts, the notion that I am the eternal essence will come and go, but it will not be permanent. There will be no conviction behind it. Desires that push us out into the world are the obstruction to such a permanent conviction. Yatatmana is another word used to describe the rishi. He has complete self-control. In other words, he has complete control over his mind and senses. He is not like most of us who are under the mind's control. The rishi knows that the body, mind and senses are different from his true self, which is the eternal essence. Once he realizes that they are different than him and have no relation to him, he does not come under their control. Furthermore, he describes rishi as sarva bhuta hite rataha, which means that he is always engaged in the welfare of all. He sees no distinction between himself, one person, and another person. It is like water and the fish. Regardless of what the fish does, the water lives in total harmony with the fish. One has no fear for the other. So therefore, such a rishi is the one who is fit to attain liberation, where he dissolves himself into the eternal essence, just like a wave dissolves into the ocean. In 5.26, he says, "One who is free from desire and anger, one who has subdued the mind, for that seeker who has realized the eternal essence, ultimate liberation exists from all sides." In this shlok, he provides the last set of attributes of the person who has attained liberation by establishing himself in the eternal essence. He says that such a person is free from desire and aversion due to his control of his mind and intellect. Like we saw in the previous shlok, ignorance of the true nature of oneself is the critical defect of the mind. It is this ignorance alone that creates desire and aversion. We do not find pleasure within ourselves, so we rush outside with desire. If the desire is not obtained, we get irritated and angry. This is the life of an ignorant person in a nutshell. It is the constant seeking of pleasure and getting annoyed when pleasure is not obtained. So the wise person, having removed his ignorance, is free from desire and anger. So then, to conclude the chapter's teachings, Lord Krishna says that such a wise person, one who has identified with the eternal essence, obtains liberation from all sides. In other words, such a wise person is liberated while he is living and remains liberated while he is dead. In the next and final 3 shlokas of chapter 5, Lord Krishna gives us a preview of dhyana yoga. So in 5.27 and 5.28 he says, "Shutting out all thoughts of external enjoyment with the gaze fixed on the space between the eyebrows, equalizing the flow of the incoming and outgoing breath in the nostrils, and thus controlling the senses, mind and intellect, The sage who becomes free from desire and fear always lives in freedom. Lord Krishna here describes the path that the ascetics take. He says that ascetics shut out thoughts of sense objects by controlling their sight and breath. They focus their gaze between their eyebrows. If the eyes are fully closed, sleep may overtake one, and if they are wide open, they may get distracted by the objects around them. In order to avoid both these defects, the ascetics concentrate their gaze with the eyes half open between the eyebrows or the tip of the nose. They also harmonize the pran, which is outgoing breath, with the apan, which is incoming breath, until both become suspended in yogic trance. This yogic process enables the controlling of the senses, mind, and intellect. Such persons make liberation from material energy as their only goal. And in the final shlok he says, having known me as the recipient of sacrifices and austerities, as the controller of all worlds, and as the well-wisher of all beings, he will attain peace. In this shlok, Lord Krishna gives us the objective of meditation. In other words, this shlok tells us what one comes to know in the state of meditation. This shlok is a preview of the topic covered in the 7th chapter to the 12th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is the elaboration of Ishwar. The goal of meditation is to realize the eternal essence. It is similar to a wave that realizes its identity with water. In this manner, the wave realizes that it is no longer the finite entity that it once was. It is one wave, but it is also a part of other waves. It is the entire ocean. Similarly, once the meditator realizes his oneness with the Brahman, or the eternal essence, which is analogous to water, he attains Ishwar, who is analogous to the ocean in the example given. Ishwar is called the controller of all beings in the shlok. Through Prakriti or Maya, Ishwar manifests as the laws or rules by which our lives as well as the lives of plants, animals, and inert objects are governed. Finally, Ishwar is the well-wisher of all beings. He treats everyone equally. His laws work without any expectation or ulterior motive. They also work non-stop, just like our heart beats and our breath functions all the time. In this manner, Ishwar is the highest well-wisher and friend of all beings. If we too make friends with Ishwar, which is another way of saying that we work in the best interest of the world, we do not have to worry about our well-being. Ishwar takes care of us. So therefore, the one who comes to know the eternal essence and realizes his unity with Ishwar during the meditation, he attains peace. This is the concluding message of the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. So in summary, the 5th chapter titled Karma Sannyas Yoga began with Arjun's question to Sri Krishna, and the question was, what was better, renouncing all actions and becoming a monk, or performing actions as a karma yogi? Lord Krishna addressed this question by reiterating the nuance that Arjun had missed. Renouncing of actions did not mean giving up the physical performance of actions. It meant renouncing the sense of doership, the sense that I am doing something. In order to get to this stage, one has to have purified one's mind completely of desires. In that regard, performing actions in the spirit of Karma Yoga was the correct source of action for Arjun, since he still harbored desires. As one continues to dedicate the result of actions to Ishwar, one's sense of enjoyership and doership automatically diminishes. Next, Lord Krishna expounded upon the vision of the realized seeker. He provided a detailed illustration of the body, mind, and intellect functioning on their own, including the acts of perception, cognition, and intellect's response to stimuli. All these acts in reality happen without the involvement of I. The illustration that the I resides in a city of 9 gates was given to further drive home the point. Another aspect of the realized seeker's vision is his samadrishti, or the sameness of vision. The realized seeker sees the same eternal essence in a human, or an elephant, or a dog eater. Not only that, he also sees the same eternal essence in positive and negative experiences. He holds the convictions that these defects or modifications are part of Prakriti. He does not view these defects as part of the eternal essence, since the eternal essence is ever perfect. Then Sri Krishna explained that just like the eternal essence in the body does not cause action, so too does the eternal essence at the cosmic level not cause action. Neither does the eternal essence connect results to actions, nor does it dole out sin and merit. All these transactions happen inside Prakriti or nature. In the closing shlokas of the 5th chapter, Lord Krishna slowly begins pointing us towards meditation. Meditation is the only way for the seeker to get fully established in the eternal essence. The primary goal has to be the realization of eternal essence and nothing else. Next, Sri Krishna informs us that it is the sense contacts that are obstacles to meditation. Our mind rushes out due to the urges generated desire and anger. Only by controlling this urge can we progress towards meditation. Lastly, Lord Krishna elaborates on the state of a liberated seeker. Such a seeker has discovered the infinite joy within himself. He finds no need to rush outside into the world for joy and bliss. This concludes the 5th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. The links to the other chapters have been provided in the description box. Hit the like button if you liked the explanation. Consider subscribing to our channel OM Dharma and share the video with your loved ones. Peace.